Everybody, why don't you find a seat, and we're going to get started with I Go to the Rock. Welcome, and we're looking forward to our Wednesday night. Got a couple of Bible studies, going to have some time in prayer once again. So as you find your seats, we'll begin. Where do I go when there's no one else to turn to? Who do I talk to when no one wants to listen? Who do I lean on when there's no foundation stable? I go to the rock I know that's able. I go to the rock. I go to the rock of my salvation. I go to the stone that the builders rejected. I run to the mountain and the mountain stands by me. The earth all around me is sinking sand. On Christ the solid rock I stand. When I need a shelter, when I need a friend, I go to the rock. Where do I hide till the storms have all passed over? Where do I run to when the winds of sorrow threaten? Is there a refuge in the time of tribulation? When my soul needs consolation, I go to the rock. I go to the rock of my salvation. I go to the stone that the builders rejected. Run to the mountain and the mountain stands by me. The earth all around me is sinking sand. On Christ the solid rock I stand. When I need a shelter, when I need a friend, I go to the rock. When I need a shelter, when I need a friend, I go to the rock. Come just as you are. Hear the Spirit call. And come just as you are. And come and see. Come receive. Come and live forever. Life everlasting and strength for today. Taste the living water and never thirst again. And come just as you are and hear the Spirit call. And come just as you are. Come receive Christ the King. Come and live forevermore. Amen. Well, thanks for singing along. Tonight, we are going to dismiss the young people. They're getting started on their on the Easter music tonight. I know that we've spent a lot of time on Christmas plays. We have just about 4 weeks, so I encourage you to get your kids back there if you can, young people. We're looking to the Bible as well, and we'll look to 1 Samuel. All right, we're just a couple weeks away from our regular business meeting, so don't forget that's going to be April 16th.
just encouraging the missions committee and a variety of other folks to get together so that the deacons can have their final meeting. So be sure to meet with, now let us know if you have anything we need to consider, because we're going to meet in just a couple of weeks, and at that point, it'll be a little late. The kids' music started tonight, so just kind of a reminder to parents, if you can make it on Wednesday night, see fit to do that, and see, we have about 4 weeks to work on the music, and we're hoping to get that done. 1 Samuel chapter number 16, 1 Samuel 16, the Ascend Youth Conference is April 2nd through the 4th, and I believe that means that some of us are going to be out of town for a little while, so be praying for that if you will. And we're going to grab our Bibles. 1 Samuel chapter number 16 and verse number 14. All right, why am I fighting? Why am I fighting with everyone? I don't know if this is going to pertain to you or not, but we're going to learn a little bit about the life of Saul here. We will take this chance. He's in a lot of different fights, and we're going to try to summarize his life and the things that are causing him to struggle in all of his relationships. Last week we talked about the relationship breaking, a broken relationship between Saul and Samuel, and really, by extension, a broken relationship between Samuel and God. And we draw a lot of the same relational principles from that. We saw a lot of similarities that we've seen over the years in a number of relationships. And as we come to why am I fighting with everyone, I'll just say that this message is about, really there's just one major point, but there are a lot of interesting things that happen here, some important things to learn about, I want to say like an evil spirit, with something about God sending an evil spirit, a little bit to learn about the power of music and things like that. So let's begin 1 Samuel chapter 16 and verse number 14, and we'll see the root and the beginning of all the troubles of Saul. Now, 1 Samuel 16:14 says, "But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him." And before we go any farther, we'll just clear that all of Saul's issues with relationships are all boiled down to one broken relationship, right? And that is with God. And the Spirit of God is what made Saul successful, and the absence of the Spirit of God is what's going to make him an utter failure. And of course, even with the Spirit of God, the decisions that Saul made, right, broke that relationship. Gratefully, we live in a New Testament, right, and we have an opportunity not only to have the Spirit of God, but to have it in a way, right, I will never leave you or forsake you. And that's a challenge. It wasn't like that in the Old Testament. And we do learn that even by the Spirit, we can have a lot of relational issues. So number one, as we go back to 1 Samuel 16:14, we are picking up where we left off last week when he was fighting with Samuel. Now we're going to go, why is Saul fighting with everyone else? From this point on, Samuel and Saul don't have any contact unless you count possibly through a medium, the witch of Endor. But at any rate, some people will argue about whether or not that was a really Samuel, right, or what was happening there. A lot of interesting stuff. The life of Saul is fraught with a lot of demonic influences and spiritual influences, and we see as a result of his rejection of God, his dabbling in trying to be a priest when God hadn't called him to be one, or making sacrifices, or just dabbling slightly with witches and stuff like that. He ends up with a lot of mental issues, a lot of spiritual issues, and we're going to see those here as we begin. But we come back to this root cause. But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. So the source of all of his conflicts have to do with the loss of God's presence in his life and the influence of what we call here an evil spirit. This couple words we need to know, and I think it's important. One, the first word we're going to read here is evil. You said, did God send an evil spirit? And the word here is a spirit of affliction, a spirit of suffering, a spirit of anxiety. So essentially what we're dealing with here is from God, he is now receiving a spirit of affliction. Now that's a real thing, right? We know it's possible. Hebrews chapter 12 tells us that if we are out of line, God will chasten us. God will punish us, right? And that, or we say not even punishment's the wrong word if you're looking at it from an American standpoint or an English standpoint. We discipline us, right? And no discipline for the present time seems Wonderful. But at any rate, this broken relationship, we have the loss of God's Spirit and the influence of an evil spirit. Now, either of these could be detrimental to your life, right? That is a loss of a quality relationship with God. Anytime your relationship with God is out of sync, that can cause huge problems in your personal relationships. And then anytime you have any kind of satanic influence or spiritual influences outside of God, you can be having relational issues. And so he's got kind of a double whammy here. We're going to learn about that as we continue through the passage. As a result, we could cover like 10 or 15 different fights that Saul has, but I think they all boil down to one point. And so we're going to take some time to go through his life, and we're going to see what the spiritual change in his life did to the rest of his life, and we're going to see why he's fighting with everyone that he meets, why he's murderous toward all the different people in his life. And I don't know, have you ever met somebody that can't get along with anyone, right? Or have you ever been the person where you wake up one morning and it seems like everybody all day is the problem, right? And you might be the one. If everybody's a problem, it might be you, right? But at any rate, we've all been there, I think. We've met someone that you just can't, no one can do right by. Or I remember there was a gentleman years ago, he's still living, he's around here, and he used to he had this thing with people in the community, and it was pretty well known, and I've heard plenty about it, and I had a friend, and essentially what he would do is he would come around, he would be super nice to someone, like overly generous, like giving them things, and then, I don't know, just one day there would just be a switch, and that person was dead to them. And it was you never know when it's going to happen, but it would happen. We watch it happen over and over to a number of people, and I just remember always being glad that I was neither on his bad side or on his good side, just as I was under the radar, so I wasn't either in or out, so I never had to deal with the wrath or the frustration. But it was obvious, and still to this day, it's obvious to me by the relational provenance that the problem is not everyone. Everyone didn't hurt him so bad that his life is over, right? That he has a pattern of behavior. And so we're going to see a pattern of behavior in the life of Saul. It doesn't matter who he's dealing with, his son or David, or whether he's dealing with the priests of Nob, or it's always going to be someone, right? He's the problem. And that core issue, the spiritual issue he has, is going to influence a lot of the troubles in his life. And I think it's a good example to us to maintain our spiritual balance, right? To make sure that we are leaning into God and that we are expelling anything that is spiritually detrimental to us. And so let's go down in the passage a little bit. Verse number 16, verse number 14, it says, in verse number 15, "And Saul's servant said unto him, Behold, now an evil spirit from God troubles you." And this is, again, when they saw it happening, it's obvious to everybody that Saul has a problem. And the first thing they're going to try to do is they're going to try by worldly means to fix it. We go down to the bottom, and it says, Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, "Send me David, thy son, which is with the sheep." And we learned a little about the story, but it's in verse number 22, it matters. And Saul sent to Jesse, verse number 23, "And it came to pass when the evil spirit from God was upon Saul, that David took a harp and played with his hand, and so Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him." And so we're just dealing with this kind of issue that he has in his life. And as a result of a number of worldly means, I've seen this too. You can try a lot of things in your life, a lot of relationships, people are trying by some means to calm themselves. We live in today where the world psychology, for instance, will give you a number of methods to calm yourself down or to uplift your mood. And then here, they were not as foolish as we might think the older generations were, or the ancient peoples don't know anything about science. They did know that music was powerful. And so what would happen is when Saul would be in a difficult state, in a dangerous state, or in a troubled state of mind, they would bring in a musician, and that was their solution. That was a Jewish solution for, apparently, for a spiritual problem. And that was the advisors of Saul. I assume that's, and again, there's no way really to tell, but I assume that's a societal or a cultural remedy to issues. And there's a couple things we learn from this right here. One, we learn that Saul is not going to have lasting peace from worldly methods. And I think that's important because, you could equip yourself with all of the necessary doodads or all of the practices or ways to calm yourself. And here's the reality, right? And that is that if you don't deal with the core problem in your life, that's just always going to be temporary. And so we're going to read here that initially David plays the harp, and he's very skilled. He's a great musician, and that will change moods. And that's why it's very important. I think in this passage, it may be a great example of the fact that, and David understood this, that there is a great power in music. And I think it's important for Christians to know that music is a very powerful thing, and the way we use it matters. And we are living in a culture that's not really sure how they feel about that. And just clearly, without making a lot of, pressing a lot of my ideas on it, I think it's important to recognize music has power to change the mood, to influence. Now, I'm going to say a little farther that music has power, at least, to calm spiritual forces, right? Isn't that what we just learned from? This is an evil spirit from God. So what happens is when David plays with the harp, this is the remedy, that the evil spirit goes away, okay? So that tells us what? That music, in a sense, even helps us with spiritual things, right? And we've learned that. We're in church. That's why music is a huge part of worship. It's no wonder that David, the man who learned to solve spiritual, evil spirits in Saul, goes on to be like the founder of religious music in Israel, right? Because he realized that music was powerful. And so that's important. It's kind of a side note, maybe music will help you if you got issues, right? And I appreciate it for what it is, and I appreciate that it can move our spirits and that it has spiritual power. And I think that's important for Christians to notice. I think it's important for them as they choose their music, as they make decisions, to remember that music is powerful. And that music has, at very least, has some control over the spirit of people. And of course, we've seen that both good and bad throughout history. And it's here in the Bible. It's not just a worldly construct. But he's trying by worldly means. He's got this is a great tool. Medication can be a tool for your problems, right? And music could be a tool to calm you down, and exercise and a number of disciplines can be tools. I was listening to a guy the other day, and he said that one of the things they do with anxiety is when you take a breath and you breathe in as deep as you possibly can until you can't inhale anymore, and then take one more breath and then let it out slowly. And he said, try that like 3 times. And I'm not kidding. I get stressed. I'm a very neurotic human, and that works. It helps. It helps, if you have time to breathe. Now, if you're in an intense situation, how many of you know you're not going to breathe, right? You're going to probably yell, and I've done that before too. You're going to be anxious. You're going to be, worried about. You're going to hyperventilate over your situation. Maybe you're not going to do that, but at any rate, whatever your issue is, you can have the tools. But the problem is spiritual. And so as believers, we go back to the old reality, right? The spiritual reality, which is all the tools that you have for relationships, they're fine. But if you have a spiritual problem, you're not going to solve it by even with good tools. And that's essentially what's happening to Saul. And so we know Saul has a problem in his breakdowns of relationships, and we're going to go through the Bible and see that breakdown as we continue. Go to 1 Samuel 18. Verse number 6, 1 Samuel 18, verse number 6. We're going to just kind of move through his life, and we're going to approach this. We see now he has the evil spirit. They recognize it, the influence of music. He's having some victory, or at least some relief from this spiritual oppression that he's dealing with. 1 Samuel 18, 6 through 11. And it says in verse number 6, and it came to pass that as they came, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women came out of all the cities of Israel singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tabrets and with joy and with instruments of music. And the women answered one another as they played and said, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. And what happens to Saul here? He's angry, right? He says he's very wroth, the Bible says. That's the word wrath here, old word. He's very wroth, and the saying displeased him. So here's something about Saul's spiritual problem. He could go along doing fine, and somebody's going to say something, and what's going to happen? It's going to set him off. Now, Saul's the king. We've seen a lot of kings in the past, and their authority's challenged. Kings do not always react negatively, right? We've seen David and his authority challenged, and he handles it really well. Remember Abishai, some guys follow him along, mocking David, and Abishai said, let me go up and lift this guy's head off the top of him. And David said, no, this is a joyful day. We're not going to do that today, right? We're not going to worry about what he says to me. See, David knew that he had power from God, right? He knew that he was the rightful king. Even when Absalom took his kingdom, you see kind of the reaction of David, you would expect him to be like not feeling like a king, but you don't see that from him, right? He has a very strong confidence in his position in the Lord. He recognized that God's doing something in his life, and he's willing to take his lickings because of his sin, and he knows that God has an end. So not everybody reacts this way when they hear someone talk negatively, but Saul is triggered, right? He's triggered by this statement that David is slaying his 10,000s. And I was trying to think, like, how many of you think there's a very good chance that was not that intentional, right? Do you think that people were trying to usurp Saul? I mean, I've asked myself. I'm guessing that everybody's singing and dancing, and there's a lot of fun going on. Not a lot of thought going into what's being said, right? It's just probably somebody said, Saul is slaying his thousands, David is slaying his 10,000s, and they're probably were. If he'd waited another minute, Saul might have slowed 100,000. We don't know. You didn't hear any of that, but he heard that, and he was angry, and he was displeased as a result. Here's the problem with worldly means, right? They're not always going to be at your disposal, and if you have a situational problem, like one that, if you're one of those people that is good as long as you're not in a bad situation, guess what's going to happen, right? It's going to come. I mean, you're going to be caught off guard, and if you don't have character, or if you have a spiritual issue, it's going to manifest. And the Bible says that it displeased him, and here's these words: he was wroth, it displeased him, and they ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. I think it's interesting that we're listening to what he's saying in his mind and his heart. And he goes, man, he's mad. Oh, man, they said thousands, and they said 10,000s for David. And it said, what can he have more except the kingdom? And we know that pride is an issue. It's been a continuing issue. It didn't end when God rejected him from being king because of his prideful behavior. It continued on. So again, Saul has this kind of like, he never... all the warning signs, he never hits the brakes when it comes to this. And Saul eyed David from that day forward. Now, Saul's problem started with Samuel, and it was a spiritual problem with God, right? He broke his relationship with his closest ally, Samuel, the spiritual ally. And now he has David, who's the closest thing to a spiritual ally he has, right? Someone who, whenever he has a problem, David's brought in to solve that problem. And I think sometimes we just forget that about the fact that Saul had been mentally unstable. He'd been at least emotionally unstable. He had this spiritual oppression in his life, and people saw that, and they brought David into his life, and David has been the person that has kept him calm, right? He has kept him like on the level, and I think that's really something we need to recognize. He didn't just get jealous of David. He'd been leaning on David for a long time, right? And now he comes to this point in his life, verse number 10, it came to pass in the morning that an evil spirit from God came upon Saul. And how many of you know that if you start thinking bad thoughts today, that will influence your actions tomorrow, right? And so he has this kind of festering thought process toward David. And the next day, when the evil spirit comes on him, he prophesied in the midst of the house, maybe the second most interesting verse in 1 Samuel. One of the first most interesting was the fact to me that David could play music and it could assuage spiritual forces in Saul's life. And the second most impressive to me was, anybody read these words? The evil spirit came on him in the morning, and that evil spirit from God came on Saul, and he prophesied in the midst of the house. How many of you have ever read that? Anybody ever recognize that word that Saul was prophesying in the middle of the house? If that's a news to you, raise your hand. You ever read that? Okay. I've read it a ton of times. I just never picked up on it. It's never even occurred to me. And I went to myself, wait a minute, what kind of spirit is on Saul? Evil spirit, right? And he prophesied in the house. They're like, wait, what does that mean, right? Did that? Does anybody else read that? And that's a troubling verse in the Bible. One of those, like, man, if I'm going to circle that one, these are the kind of verses that people read and go, I'm going to call pastor now. Hey, Anthony, what are you doing right now? We have a conversation. What does that mean? I did this myself. I read it out and I said, now how have I read that verse 1,000 times? And I think maybe I was always fixated on the fact that David's running from a spear that's trying to stick him to the wall. And when I was young, the idea that you would stick somebody to the wall with a spear was a lot more exciting than prophecy, so I missed it. But I'm reading now, and all of a sudden I saw this, that Saul is prophesying in the house. So I'm not sure what that means. I did some quick research on that, because some of you might read it and then be a little surprised. And I thought I would bring it out since we talk about relational conflict a lot. One of the things that I think is important to recognize, there are a couple of ways to explain this. One, the evil spirit may not have been a sinful spirit. It might have been a tormenting spirit, and it might have just been tormenting him by telling him the truth. I don't know if you know this, but throughout Saul's life, he says things that are true. When he's in these difficult spirits, he knows what's going to happen to him, and that is destroying him, right? He knows the reality of what he's done, and that's destroying him. The other thing that we learn in the Bible is that there is negative prophecy, not just positive prophecy, but there's negative prophecy. And a number of commentators, the Dean of Canterbury, I don't know who that guy is, he started with it, but he said that, and I don't read the Hebrew, so I'm just going to parrot this and hopefully it'll be helpful to you. He said that every single prophecy in the Bible that you will read that is a good prophecy will be spoken in one kind of verb, which would basically, it's called a nifal or nifel. And that is like one conjugation of the verb. And he said, you will never find a false prophecy in that conjugation, he said, and you will never find the hithpale, I don't know how to say it exactly, it's another kind of verb, like tense or whatever, or like a construct. He said, you will never find good prophecy spoken of in that sense. And so he believes what we're talking about is evil prophecy. Almost every translation except one will translate this prophesied. One translation says he was raving, okay? But essentially, whatever was happening here, we know that Saul is in an evil spirit, and the words prophesying here, I don't know what that means. I don't know if we're talking about spiritual forces influencing his life, and he is, saying truths a lot like, let's say, the man at the tomb would have to Jesus, right? Prophesying. I mean, he recognized Jesus Christ as the Son of God, even though it was an evil spirit. And so we've heard Satan and evil spirits say a lot of true things. I don't know what that means. At any rate, he's in the middle of this thing, and he's having this reaction, right? And he's doing it in the middle of his house. And David played with his hand as at other times, but we have a difference here, don't we? This time, it doesn't work. And that's important about worldly methods, and we know this, right, about medications. We know this about anything that we employ, like over and over and over again. How many of you know you build up resistance to that? And also, maybe in this position, now he doesn't see David the same way he saw him before. So that worldly method was working for him for a long time. But when this jealousy toward David started, when he started seeing David as a negative influence, David couldn't play music and stop this spiritual problem, right? And so that's why Christians need real spiritual solutions to their personal problems and not just physical ones. And I think it's important. I'm not saying that you shouldn't employ good methods. Like, I'm saying you shouldn't breathe sometimes if you're nervous, or, wait 10 seconds when you're angry, or those are all good things to do. But if you have a spiritual problem, you got to deal with a spiritual problem, because all those methods, they're not going to be efficacious in every circumstance. That's why we look for the transformative work of Christ in our lives, and not just the conforming to the world in worldly ways. We got some other examples of false prophecy. I'll read some of those. Jeremiah chapter 29 and verse number 9. Jeremiah 29, verse number 9. Just because he was prophesying doesn't mean he was a spiritual person. This could have been, when this evil spirit from God came upon him, he could have been saying true things, and they could have been things that were loathsome to him, like you're not going to be king, or you're going to lose your throne, right? Or your family's going to be gone. I don't know how you say that. A lot of truth from false spirits comes out here. Later on, a witch at Endor will practice necromancy, and the outcome of that will be to tell Saul that him and his sons are going to die in the next battle. And that was true. They did. And it's, just because You know, the devil, he can tell the truth too, always for the wrong reasons and always with a little bit of twist there, but we see that happening. It says, "For they prophesy falsely unto you in my name. I have not sent them, saith the Lord." So prophecy could also refer to a kind of talking. Maybe he was not really prophesying from God, just the way that he was talking. He was trying to be prophetic in the way that he speaks. Jeremiah 29:26 says this, "The Lord has made you priest in the stead of Jehoiada the priest, that you should be officers in the house of the Lord. For every man that is mad and makes himself a prophet." Now, that's a kind of a key verse here in the Bible. When we say Saul prophesied, we did Lord hear that some people that are essentially crazy people that would prophesy, right? That happened in the Bible too. He said he's mad and he makes himself a prophet. "Thou shouldest put him in prison and in the stocks. Now therefore, why hast thou not reproved Jeremiah of Anathoth, which makes himself a prophet to you?" So essentially, when we're looking at the Bible, we see that there was negative prophecy, so we're assuming that's what Saul was doing. And what happens on the heels of the prophecy? Well, he picks up a spear and he tries to kill David twice in a row. I thought it was funny about David. Like, David goes in there, plays the harp, and he tries to kill him, and then he's got to go in again and play the harp again, and just waiting for the spear to come. At any rate, he makes out of both those things. So now we're having a broken relationship with Samuel. Now we have a broken relationship with David, right? And that's hugely problematic. Look what happens next. Look back to 1 Samuel chapter 18. 1 Samuel chapter 18, we're going to see that Saul begins to alienate his family members. It started with a spiritual person that told him what he didn't want to hear, right? It started with a prophet that told him what he didn't want to hear. It moved to his helpers, his therapists, if you will, his musical confidant, his right-hand man. Now he's broken that relationship. Once again, Saul has a pattern. Close relationships, they are met with punishment, right? Not with blessings. And it says, "And Saul said to David, Behold, my elder daughter Merab, her will I give you to wife. Only be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles. For Saul said, Let not mine hand be upon him, but let the hand of the Philistines be upon him." So he's trying to kill David, right? He wants him dead. And he's basically saying, "I'm going to give you my daughter to be your wife. Only get out there and fight these battles." So he keeps sending him out to war, trying to get him dead, right? That's kind of the goal. He's like, I don't want to murder him, so I'll just send him out there and get him killed, which ironically is later a method that David uses to kill Uriah. But God's hand is with David, and David keeps coming back. And so he offers his first daughter to David, and then when he's about to marry her, he takes Merab and marries her to somebody else. So now he's in his ploy to destroy David's life. He has got his daughter into these various... How many of you think that's probably didn't go well for Merab, her marriage, as a result of this kind of game he's playing with her? You think maybe she married a great guy after the end of this? Or do you think maybe this helped her? No, once again, we see him now, he's playing games with his family. Again, so now he's alienating his daughters. With next one, we have Michal, right? It came to pass, in verse 20, Saul's daughter loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased him, right? And so now he's used Merab. He only has 2 daughters that we know of. He's going to use her, and he's going to play the game with Michal. I'll give Michal to David, and she'll be able to help me get him destroyed. And then now Michal falls in love with David. And then when David runs, she helps him, and he takes Michal and marries her to somebody else. And so now he's ruined both of his daughters' lives and their integrity. How did that happen? Personal problem. He's breaking all his relationships. The spiritual relationship, the relationship with his right-hand man, the relationship with his daughters, all these relationships broken, right? In shambles. He's alone. He's even more lonely than ever. He continues, though, down the same path here. In verse 19, chapter 19 and verse 9, let's go there. Chapter 19 and verse 9. This happens again here. In verse number 9, it says, "And the evil spirit from the Lord was upon Saul, and he sat in his house with his javelin in his hand, and David played with his hand again." This is the same wording, but it's a different story. "And Saul sought to smite David even to the wall with a javelin, but he slipped away out of Saul's presence, and he smote the javelin into the wall. and David fled and escaped that night. So now he's still trying to kill David. And you're going, okay, well, I get it. David's his enemy, right? I mean, at least David's the person who's going to take his job. So we can see why he comes to hate him. But look at chapter 20. Chapter 20. Now he's using these same methods. He's trying to kill David. He's tried to kill Samuel, right? He's done it. He's got all this kind of stuff going on. 1 Samuel 20, 25 to 32. Now he's alienated all of his friends. He's alienated his daughters. The only people left around him are those that are benefiting financially from him. In verse 25, it says, the king sat upon a seat like he did at other times, even upon a seat by the wall. And Jonathan arose, and Abner by Saul's side, and David's place was empty. Nevertheless, Saul spake not anything that day, for he thought, something has befallen him. He is not clean. Surely he is not clean. In other words, there's a lot of reasons you wouldn't go in the king's presence. Maybe ceremonial uncleanliness would have kept him out of the midst. And it came to pass on the morrow, it was the second day of the month, that David's place was empty. And Saul said to Jonathan his son, wherefore cometh not the son of Jesse to meat, neither yesterday nor today? So why didn't he come to dinner last 2 days? And Jonathan answered Saul and said, David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. And he said, let me go, I pray thee, for our family has a sacrifice in the city. My brother, he has commanded me to be there. And now if I have found favor in your eyes, let me get away, I pray thee, and see my brethren. Therefore he cometh not to the king's table. And Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan. And he said to him, thou son of a perverse and rebellious woman. Now Jonathan's in line for the throne.